further away from modern day technologies. So, the sieving actually was what really became popular. It was brought back to Europe and throughout Asia, essentially burned as an incense, or making into products like majunes or topical oils in places like Ukraine. But until you actually had European expansion, cannabis was brought to Europe, and then all of a sudden everyone started cultivating it for hemp, growing things like ropes, sails, fibers, because they actually realized that the high lignin content in the fiber allowed for the ropes and sails not to degrade in salt water. Papyrus actually will break down in salt water. So you did not have transoceanic travel until they started extracting the fibers, turning them into ropes, sails, and that allowed for Mediterranean Sea expansion. That then later led to the transatlantic expansion. So we had a couple hundred years of essentially dry sieving technology, and that really led the world trade in extracted cannabinoids, from Asia Minor as well as Eastern Europe through many of the hash producing areas, both in the Indian subcontinent, South and Eastern Asia, Middle East, all the way up to Europe. And we really saw the boom in Europe because Europe had markets that were a little bit more permissible than the U.S. when the U.S. started ramping up prohibition. Marcus, when you started going to Amsterdam, what did you see when you started going there, and then as the industry evolved, what extraction technologies kind of developed?
Well, the first time I went to Amsterdam was in 1995. I went for the, I think it was like the 8th annual Cannabis Cup, or maybe the 6th. And of course I went to as many coffee shops as I could, which was just quite an experience from never having done that. And then eventually was led to the Bluebird. Most of the coffee shops really didn't have a lot of hash. They had like palm, they called it, which is basically a sift pressed into a little brick. But the Bluebird had all of the hashes from Lebanon and India, Nepal, Afghanistan, Morocco. And you could really experience these different hashes. Because for me, I had never really experienced those prior to that. A few, like I saw some Afghani and I saw some Moroccan, but not much else. And so that was a unique experience to see. But funny enough, in 1995, I also sort of accidentally bumped into this character, Robert Connell Clark, who wrote the great book Marijuana Botany and Hashish. And he gave me a bong rip, and it was a Ruhr, I'll never forget it, filled it up with this sift. I would later learn that it was Skunkman Sam's dry sift. And when he lit it, it just melted into a liquid and just puddled through the screen. And I'll never forget when he looked at me, because he was so excited. And I remember when there was no dabs and no bubble, and the year that I released bubble bags, and suddenly people started having this. It was a very unique transfer. He was looking at me with those eyes, and he literally said, "If it don't bubble, it ain't worth the trouble." And I was just like, so I was getting turned on to all these old school hashes, but simultaneously my mission and my adventure and my path was going to be something different. And that was the first time I'd ever seen full melt hash, 1995. The rest of the world wouldn't see it till around 1998, 99. So that was a long break to find a hash that would melt into a liquid. So I saw both of those in 95.
And Noel, obviously you kind of started off down in California. As the industry started in California, obviously we had 20 some odd years of it being medical, and then it slowly started going into the regulated market. So what did you see early on in the market, and how did that market slowly evolve? Because I feel like California almost leapfrogged Amsterdam due to the Prop 215. And what we're seeing in many of the U.S. states is, as states pass regulation over the last decade, a place like California almost gets surpassed by states like Colorado, Washington for short periods of time.
It did for a little bit there, but
and then places like Oregon, California come online, and they start ramping up. And we're kind of seeing the same thing here. Canada had a booming industry, but then everyone has to go through the round of licensing and regulations and inspections. You have to literally go from high school level extraction back to elementary school school products, right?
I think that just the state of California has generational use. They're on the third or fourth generation of cultivators. So the roots were always really strong there. Colorado definitely legalized it first and showed us another blueprint of how the industry might work. And Washington, Oregon, the same. We did it in California. But that whole time, we're looking for, before we had the testing to be able to test for terpenes, which was just in the last decade or so that we even had an ability to measure that number. To us, it was, does it smell good? Does it taste good? As a connoisseur, that's what was my concern. And in the pursuit of terpenes, I explored all of the different types of extraction techniques and found, rosin still wasn't there yet, and found that the most terpenes could be done with hydrocarbon extraction and live resin. And then it moved on to how do we preserve that material, how do we best harvest it, best harvest practice. Specifically for, let's say, hashes, it's built around this cultivar itself. It's so very cultivar specific that I look at that as a harder product to create a higher level. And as a solventless maker, or a solvent maker, I realized that our path was to create what is the most popular items out there now, which is live resin tips or vape pens in general, because it is easy and convenient for the users to first experiment as they come online and see it.
No, when you're actually pheno hunting or selecting cultivars for solvent extraction, what are you specifically looking for in different cultivars?
Terpenes, high levels of terpenes. Like now we look at a lot of analytics before we actually do the extractions. But in the past, I would like to do small runs and just to see how it did. We're looking at both yield and terpene count. And so a high terpene percentage in flowers is like 3 to 4%. I've seen up to 5 now. And then in extraction, it's anywhere between 5 to 30% in the extraction technique.
Do you think that when you say terpenes, I hear volatile organic compounds, because I'm also considering the thiols, the thioates, the esters, the other aromatic volatiles that we're still not talking about yet, but we will, and we're sort of starting. Terpenes is also, like you said, about 10 years that you've been. The conversation hasn't been around for that long.
No, it hasn't.
Skunkman Sam, for him, for sure, because he was the one that did the first modulating the terpenes and the pure cannabinoids. But I just wonder if you also, where do you think it's going with testing and understanding, because there's such a small percentage of the profile of volatile organic compounds, are they being forgotten, or are they more important than we think in allowing the entire the entire volatile organic compounds profile to shift from strawberry cheesecake over to rotten peppers?
Yeah.
Like a thiol can do that very quickly. It's a thiol that comes out of a skunk. That is not a terpene.
Yeah, I think that now we're to the point of high levels of biomass production, because those are in such